Good evening. Good evening, good evening. I think there's one thing that can be said, which is it's a really good time for the Dharma. This is a really good time for the Dharma. It's just such an increasingly challenging and difficult time for so many. And some people in this room experience that more directly than others. For some of us, it's related to institutions we work for, and for some of us, it's related to our status here in this country. And for some of us, it's related to an idea of the world that we want to be living in and the values we want to uphold. And it's almost, I'd say it's in some ways stunning how beautiful the Dharma is for exactly these times of such uncertainty and such outrage, to be totally honest. And this evening, we're going back to the chapter on working with anger. And as I've been, preparing for tonight, I'm like, oh, damn. It's such a beautiful and hard opportunity that these teachings offer us. And, it's always can be challenging to work with anger and frustration and to really see through it and to see clearly the delusion of it and the pain of it. And I think it's just so interesting right now, the kind of collective, not for everyone, of course, but the collective sense of moral outrage. And I have a wonderful colleague and friend, Molly Crockett. They are a scientist who studies moral outrage. And they've been sharing recently how the difficulty of it is it really makes us feel excited and connected, right? Yeah. And I would never sit up here and say, you shouldn't feel angry. And yet I do think it's nice to have both method and perspective of what it's like to hold that anger in different ways. And so that's what we'll be looking at this evening. And I had the beautiful good fortune to teach with Lopan Chandra Easton last week. And one of the things that came up, and many of you are familiar with the Brahma Viharas, with the four immeasurable practices, and most of us have learned them in the context of compassion, loving kindness, empathetic joy, and then equanimity. And in the Dzogchen tradition, you start with equanimity, which seems like, why are you going to start with the hardest one? Like, isn't this the great perfection? Doesn't this make things easier? But more and more, and actually over the course of this week, as we were kind of weaving together, meeting and turning towards difficult emotions, I do think it makes sense to start with equanimity, even before we move towards compassion. And in my kind of adventures with my own mind on my month on retreat in February, one of the things that emerged, I was kind of rereading my journals, was, just this idea that equanimity, sometimes a difficult to understand concept, is very aligned to maybe another difficult to understand concept, but one that has such beauty and people relate to, and it's like the quantum view, right? So drawn from quantum mechanics and this idea that there is a multiplicity of different factors and causes and realities and perspectives that are literally dancing with each other at all times. And so with equanimity, it's not, keep calm and carry on. All due respect to the British Empire, or maybe not. Maybe the British Empire can get canceled by now, those early days. But, it's not about keeping calm, about becoming aloof. It's really about seeing a much wider perspective than emotions like anger allow us to see. So with anger, it's just all the way in. We are just contracted around the object of our anger. And equanimity isn't like, get rid of the anger. It's like, all right, go all the way out and see every side around that anger too. And that is, in some ways, most of this chapter, spoiler alert, is on the benefits of patience. Again, like one of the least sexy things in Buddhism, right? Like no one's like, oh, well, discipline and patience, that's why I'm on the path. Like, no. And yet, patience has so much overlap with equanimity. And equanimity, it has such a dignity to it. It's so beautiful to kind of hold oneself with that larger view. And there's a pliancy to equanimity. It's not rigid. It's not hard. There's this kind of, recognizing the undulation and the tremors that exist in this world through loss and through change, and still kind of having some semblance that's solid, some semblance that can kind of hold our shape. And so I really appreciate these teachings on patience. And they're actually kind of funny. Shanti Deva, I don't know if he meant them to be funny, but they are pretty interesting in how provoking they are with us, of what are the ways we can start considering applying patience towards anger in our life. And then there's this quote from Pema I love. She says, as it has been said before, the hells in which we find ourselves are a projection of our own mind. Our pain is for the most part self-inflicted. The good news is, once we see this, we might be motivated to free ourselves from our misery-producing ways. And that's a lot of what we do here, right? And she says that in any encounter, so when you think of any encounter being talking with someone, picking up and looking at the news, trying to understand, she said in any encounter we have a choice. We can strengthen our resentment or our understanding and empathy, right? And that is an encounter and a choice we have so many times. She says we can widen the gap between ourselves and others or lessen it. It's really simple. And I saw a beautiful quote shared by Rhonda McGee that I might misquote, who's such a wonderful mindfulness teacher, and describing, that and she's a lawyer and has really focused on law as a way to help bring meditation and mindfulness to other systems in our world. And she said the very foundation of our legal system is based upon empathy and clear understanding. And so it's so interesting to find ourselves at a time. I was like, I didn't think I was going to be excited about the Supreme Court anytime soon, but here we are. Like, things are changing and shifting so quickly. And that is actually the perfect ground for equanimity. Because equanimity points to, it's all changing. It's all so much bigger and more complex than you could ever know. So your fixed views and ideas, they're going to get washed away by the next storm. So let's really find ourselves with that flexibility of holding the loving kindness, the compassion, the empathetic joy, the anger, the grief, the shame, holding it all with this bigger view. So the meditation I wanted to offer tonight is one that I think is so beautiful for equanimity. And I learned from such a beautiful teacher, Tig O'Malley, who some of you know here. It's a practice that I actually don't know if he created it or adopted it, but I will say that I learned it from him. And it's called holding both. Maybe some of you have done that with him. And I think with equanimity, it does offer us this opportunity because, bless you, maybe in some of the institutions or circles you all are running with, there is quite a lot of organized resistance going on these days. Some of it is really inspiring. People are coming together and recognizing their need for each other in poignant and beautiful ways. And so how can we kind of hold the both of the beauty of what's going on right now, either at the macro or the micro level, and also the difficulty and the pain of what's going on. And we'll do this a bit through kind of a somatic approach of really feeling and imagining into quite literally holding both. So that will be our practice tonight with that unbelievably lengthy preamble. So thank you for your attention, and let's find a position that feels very supportive and kind of gathering these qualities of stability and uprightness through the spine. And softness, tenderness, care through the front of the body. I'm taking a moment to just feel and recognize the experience of being in the place and the space where you are in this moment. So for those of us here in the room at the center, we're here just at the edge of dusk with skies that seem to be promising rain. And for folks at home, feeling the immediate atmosphere of the room where you're situated. And continuing through our sensory port, just to notice what is actually happening around us. So feeling through the sensations in the body, the tactile sensations. Noticing the sounds, subtle, some coming and going, some steady. Even with eyes closed, taking a moment to notice the visual field, the quality of light or shadow. And through the sense of being able to experience directly what it's like to be in this body, allowing ourselves to settle a bit more right here in this moment, in this place. Of course, thoughts and memories and images will arise and take us away to the past or the future, fantasy. But for a couple moments, inviting ourselves to keep returning to just the simple sensory experience of being here in this moment, in this place. Don't actually need any stories to be here experiencing our senses. We don't need an idea of what we're doing later. We don't even need a sense of self to just drop into this pure sensory knowing of the body, of what can be heard and seen and felt. Moment by moment, this pure experiencing of our sensory portals can give us a sense of just utter simplicity. And moment by moment, there can be more saturation through each of these sense portals. The sound becomes a little more refined, the sensations a bit more clear. And feeling the support not only of this body and this moment, but the support of these practices over thousands of years, millions of beings just like us, attending to and calibrating this simple, pure experiencing. Consider the possibility that there's no way to do this wrong. No matter how many times the so-called wild elephant of the mind brings us elsewhere, we find ourselves returning. Again, feeling this quality of posture, this dignity and uprightness of the spine. And seeing what more can be softened and released, more tenderized through the eyes, the jaw, the chest, the belly. One more time, really softening through the eyes. It's unlikely they are clenched, but is there even a deeper level or layer of softening? And again, really softening through the jaw. There is no need to brace. There is no need to express. The jaw can be completely at ease. You could even feel or imagine a sense of softness at the lips. And as we soften the heart, it's actually also the neck and the shoulders. In this moment, we are, relatively speaking, safe. The heart can be a bit more at ease. And the softening of the belly is actually almost like landing at a base camp. Just that solid foundation. And for a couple moments, really noticing any sense of enjoyment or pleasure we can just find in the breath. Now that we've established a bit of a settling into the body, and speech, and mind, we take a moment and connect to the very foundation of this practice. Whatever it is that arises in us when we hear the aspiration of bodhicitta, awakening this heart for the sake of all beings. Letting the beings feel very real. Letting the aspiration almost feel like a burning or a longing. So inviting this quality of our practice here tonight, together in this simple space, but with the sacred vision of all beings. All beings becoming more free. All beings being safe. All beings experiencing the true causes of happiness and avoiding suffering. And with that spark of bodhicitta, we shift our attention and awareness now to the mind and imagination, taking our right palm and lifting it up towards the ceiling, on the lap, in a way that feels comfortable. And considering holding in this right palm all the things in life right now at a personal level for which we experience gratitude, maybe even awe and wonder. The beauty of this day, the beauty of community or connection. That which gives us a sense of rejoicing, the goodness of others. Imagine holding in this right palm all these joys that we experience, that we share. Even imagine the joys of so many beings. There's that infinite, unceasing flow of rejoicing with the joy of all beings, in their goodness and their virtue. And our joy is part of that beautiful stream. And taking a moment, noticing how it feels in the body to hold these joys, to invite this gratitude and rejoicing. If it's hard to feel, no problem. Maybe thinking of a specific example, something simple, like the smile from someone close to you, the beauty of the raindrops, anything that can help feel that the beauty of being alive is so real and fresh right here. Keeping this palm right where it is, we release the immediate images, thoughts and ideas about this beauty, this joy. And we turn the left palm upward, and turning our attention and our heart towards, in our own life, the areas of difficulty and struggle that we also hold. All of the myriad heartbreaks, small and large, old and new. Noticing if we get caught up in a fixation or a loop, and instead trying to just feel this sense of imagining and holding, but not dialoguing. And then expanding and extending this sense of holding to the myriad sources of difficulty and heartbreak, sorrow, all around us. Feeling and finding the strength of the spine, even as we are tenderizing and opening the heart. Noticing how it feels in the body, the sensations and qualities as we allow ourselves to hold these sorrows, our own and the sorrows of the world. Not grasping, not pushing, just holding. And then finding this balance and stability to invite back in the joys. Holding in the right hand the sense of the joys, the beauty, the magnificence of this precious human life and all the beings within it. And in the left hand, holding the 10,000 sorrows of this human life and all the beings within it. And finding this mind, heart, and body that can hold both. For a moment, recognizing the awareness which holds both. Spacious, boundless capacity of awareness in which these 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows can coexist, be their own flowing rivers within us. And yet we can be greater than those flowing rivers, hosting those flowing rivers. Leaning back into the spacious awareness and gently returning our palms to face down. And finding this sense of spacious awareness infused with bodhicitta, spacious, loving awareness. Within the spacious, loving awareness, thoughts and memories and images can arise. No problem. Just keep leaning back. A couple more moments here. Feeling this inner balance of recognizing and holding both the joys and the sorrows. And having this wider, greater view. Considering this possibility that the natural state of mind is this wider, greater view infused with loving presence. Thank you for your practice. So many wonderful, familiar faces here, and yet still a reminder that when we get to come here together and practice together, each time we're constellating a new community. And in doing so, we have the opportunity to create sacred community. And to do so, we have to really embody compassionate speech and compassionate listening with one another. And part of what I feel so outrageously fortunate about in being part of this community is that we get to share with one another and connect. And to do so in a way that feels supportive is to really hold each other as Buddhas on our way, maybe a couple more lifetimes, but on our way. So if we can engage in that kind of view of one another, that is the best way to connect. And I'd love to hear if anyone has a reflection or question on that practice. I don't think I've taught it here on a Wednesday. I think Tig has, but be curious if folks had any, thoughts or reflections on kind of palpably inviting the truth, right, of the 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows that are always here flowing through us. And I don't know who has the mic. Aha.
Well, I did want to share that I can't remember if I've done that with Tig or not, but it was really beautiful. And I guess it felt like the joys were very little. There, it was really quite hard to kind of feel into that, but the sorrow felt like, this giant boulder. And so it was really interesting to work with that. And there was a moment in the practice after we had been doing it for a while that you sort of brought us back into like spacious awareness and like the joy of being human or birth or something like that. You said of being alive or something like that. That I really got one break, one momentary glimpse of like, oh, it is joyful. But it was really kind of difficult. I think that the sorrow was a lot more palpable.
Yeah. And how was holding it? Was it hard to not fall into it, or were you able to hold it without?
I think it felt good too, to just hold. And I was during the meditation, I was here on Saturday and we did like a listening with curiosity, and I think someone mentioned the pain bodies and reflected back into that Tenzin Wangyal book. And I remembered that today of like, oh yeah, I could really use the spaciousness. I think it has been really missing. So that felt really relaxing to sort of just kind of touch back into that a little bit. I don't think it had been a while. So that felt a really like a reconnect with that. That was really nice.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up, and this idea that, we lose that kind of spacious, loving awareness when we contract into the pain body, when we identify exclusively with the sorrow, the hurt, the deficiency. And it's interesting you bring it up, because I've often taught this practice after doing empathetic joy, so that the joy is right there. Right, and often it's a bit easier for us to do the empathetic joy of the rejoicing in the goodness of others and be like, yeah, it's here. Like our own joy can be a little like, it's like there's just this resistance, which is honestly totally bullshit. We should really lean in, but it can be hard to touch that or to feel it or to have access to it. And, the tenderness of being able to hold the sorrows is so beautiful. So then there's another kind of tenderness of like, how do we kind of find our way into an ease of feeling joy too? It's good homework, Cage. Into it. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions, reflections on the practice, objections, uncertainties? Oh, I see a hand online too. We'll get right to you next. Okay. No, go ahead. You got the mic.
My early life as a child was the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows, the idea of horrible, horrible tragedy and sadness, but the idea that life went on and things could still be good in the face of that was really, 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 really a huge part of my very early childhood. There was some heavy tragedy in my family, but on the other hand, life was still good, and there was an encouragement there to appreciate that. So that was my experience early on, but you lose that so easily as life goes on. But I always had that experience was so early and so powerful that it stuck with me. And tonight, thinking about the joys, that my gateway into that is gratitude. Well, I'm grateful for this, I'm grateful for that, I'm grateful for all these various things that go on in my life. And today was a really great day. And then the sorrows, yeah, they're immediate and they're very easy to get in touch with. And then when you asked us to hold them both at the same time, that's a very familiar thing for me. So it's easy in a certain sense, and it's really what my practice has been about over the years, is remembering that both this, it's going on at the same time. It's all going on at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah. Beautiful just to hear and to watch you with the hands. It's so funny when we give ourselves something to do tangibly, it actually can make a big difference, right? It's not just in here or my perception. It's such an interesting opportunity, and to have felt it as a little being and then be able to find that continuity. Yeah. No, and I think there's just like a natural resonance of truth. Like, oh yeah, that's true. There are both, right? And I think especially in this time, it can be hard for some of us to feel like we can focus on the joys when there are so many sorrows around us that can kind of come in waves. And so how can we really feel the nourishment actually of holding both, which is the nourishment of being very close to what is true. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, hello. Nice to see you.
Hi, you too. Thank you. I just wanted to add that I find this type of practice, any and all equanimity practices, very helpful when any time that it's hard to know how to hold it all. And I think that's just being alive in the world right now, how to
Yeah.
hold it. And I happen to have a lot of really positive, awesome, joyful things happening in my life right now after a long period of a really hard time. And so I've got that, and I've got, the world and everything that's going on. And so I just find equanimity practice so helpful, trying to hold the 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. It is, yeah, I don't know which is harder, like when you're really feeling the joy to let in the sorrow, or when you're really feeling the sorrow to let in the joy. They're both pretty tough. But there is such a dynamic feeling to kind of be able to feel like that feeling of holding both. My hypothesis recently in practice has been turning directly towards the hard and the difficult material. It really can be a direct pathway to that more spacious, open awareness. So often we kind of try to go directly to the spacious awareness, and we haven't in some ways kind of calibrated and attended to just the simple human nervous system, which is managing the joys and the sorrows. And so to make space for it and relax into it, that's kind of a way in for us that's very, grounded in reality and truth. And there's still the wildness of the mind. It's not like, we've turned towards the difficult and the beautiful and now we're free. But there's like a different way to orient with it. I see one more hand. Jason?
Hi. And
Hi.
I really enjoyed this, and it I think what I have to say is similar to what others have said, but it's kind of like the way in for me has always been, especially now, to just kind of appreciate looking at the things I have and looking at around me, like that sense of when you said, look, notice the atmosphere of the room, um, the sense of safety that I have,
Yeah.
just internal. And
Yeah.
because safety is the issue for me right now of feeling like there's so many people who don't have that. And I don't take it for granted that I have some safety in my current life. And I have a lot of joy if I just open to it and look around. And that's my way into survival, because it's like I'm being accosted on a level that's part of it is choice. We can choose how open we are to the world out there that's going crazy and chaotic. Um, but it's like, how much can I absorb of that? I have to stay right here. It's very much like this practice allows me to be able to have joy. And then the sorrow is so kind of outside of myself. It's like it's this kind of consciousness sorrow of the world, and some sorrow. It's so bad that it's almost like, how do I hold that? And by holding it in relation to this sense of safety, it's like Tonglen. I can hold it because I'm safe. I'm safe
Mm-hmm.
from it enough to be able to hold it. Because if I was in it,
Mm.
I think if I was being constantly reminded of how really bad it is at my front door, um, it would be very different. And so I'm just kind of like trying to find the way into survival
Yeah.
in time, as being like looking around me right where I am right now and realizing like I'm okay. So that equanimity is like, I'm okay now. And then the next minute or the next thing is like, am I okay here? What do I have to
Mm.
do to kind of keep that mindset going, meanwhile being very spacious, not contracting around fear and hope even. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Beautiful. Yeah. And then when the sorrow is at our door and we still find, we can hold it and hold both.
Mhm.
It's the thing, we have to do this training now while we can, when there is relative safety, especially for people who can't, right? So the world clearly needs more sane people. Do we agree on that? And I do think the Dharma is a practice of sanity, right? You're meeting uncertainty, you're seeing reality as it is, you're bringing compassion to the universality of suffering. And like, holy smokes, we need more. I was talking with a Dharma friend about how, in one way, you could look at the Dharma and be like, this has been around thousands of years and the world is still crazy. I don't think it's worked, right? But on the other hand, it's like, it's been around thousands of years because the world is crazy and it keeps working. Just the tipping point of enough of us who are really training, doesn't have to be the Dharma, it could be, other methods into this. In some ways, just kind of like cleansing, purifying, continuing to find the newness of the heart and mind instead of being stuck in these old ways. But there needs to be more and more of this. And I'm not sure if I remain hopeful, but I don't see another way. So I will remain hopeful. Yes, Chris.
Yeah, and you can't prove a negative. So can you just imagine how messed up things would be if
They
we
could be
didn't
even
have
worse.
Dharma?
Exactly. Thank you.
And I just have to say that I almost didn't come last week because, as you know, so I love Jenny, love
Yeah.
feeding your demons. I afraid of the weather, just thinking, and I'm just like, no, I know where I need to be.
Yeah.
And I hope some of you were here last week, but the joy in this room every Wednesday night is how I navigate. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Community. Again, good time for the Dharma. All right, let's talk about anger, y'all. Woohoo! Yeah, I love this chapter. I feel like I've actually taught from it, even when I don't teach from the whole book many times, but taking it from the top, and we'll get through what we get through, and then we'll continue going. One of the larger premise of this chapter is that when we practice in patience, there's actually kind of three modes that we can consider, these three approaches to patience. And the first is, can we do the patience of kind of reframing difficulty and adversity as an amazing opportunity for training the mind. And training the mind because we are certain there's going to be more difficulty and adversity. And there's such a different attitude when you're like, I'm going to get through this because, God, I'm just going to try to apply myself. And that this is, I'm going to get through this difficulty. And then I'm going to be like really ready when the full season comes on of more difficulties. I'll be great, time for it. And it's really cool how Shanti Deva actually recognizes mind state. That's a term in psychology that won't come for thousands of years later, but this idea that the shift in our mind state is the, quintessential kind of intervention to get out of our difficult feelings of stress and overwhelm. Can we shift how we're experiencing what's happening for us? And this shifting of the mind state to training for greater adversity, I don't know, I kind of feel like the rebel fleet in Star Wars when everything seems impossible, but you're like, no way, we're going to do this, like training for greater adversity. And then the second is that, and this one I love, 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 and this is where you really feel the presence of equanimity, is recognizing complexity. And it brings forth so many different pieces of the Buddhist path to recognize complexity, because to recognize complexity is to recognize dependent origination, to recognize that even that single leaf on the tree beneath which the Buddha awoke, it had all the causes and conditions that led to the leaf. And when he saw that clearly, he saw the clouds and the earth and the sun, he saw all the different seasons and the wind in that leaf. He could see through the illusion of anything being just a leaf. So this idea of the just profound complexity that is behind any experience we have can allow us to feel more patience. It's really elegant, really elegant. And then, the last piece of kind of how do we work with this patience that he really suggests here is that we start to kind of develop a distress tolerance. We start to kind of work with difficulties, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, I actually think distress tolerance and equanimity have a lot of overlap, right? When we have this ability to be with even the simple discomforts of, I'd really like to say something because I'm hella angry right now. And to just sit with the discomfort of, I'm not going to say something because I recognize it'll make matters worse, right? Like that distress tolerance is very challenging. And yet, It's kind of a superpower. And there's no way we can have it without training the mind to be still enough to recognize that is what's arising. So it's all interlinked in this beautiful way. Yeah. So I think starting here was just this first aspect. He says, or Pema Chödrön says, that the first category of patience comes from reframing our attitude towards discomfort. The second one is understanding complexity. And the third is from, she calls it developing tolerance, but I like this distress, overcoming distress here. And these next couple stanzas are just so wonderful. He says, there is nothing that does not grow light through the habit of familiarity. So grow light, meaning easy to bear. There's nothing that does not grow light through habit and familiarity. Putting up with little cares, I'll train myself to bear with greater adversity. So this idea of I'm going to learn to train in greater adversity through training with like the low level difficulties. Because it's very hard to start training when things are extremely, burdensome for us. So kind of like Jason was saying, I'm going to orient myself towards what's good and cultivate equanimity while I have the relative safety to do so. And then these next couple stanzas is where I think it's humorous, but we can that's up for debate. He says, and then do I not already bear with the common irritations, bites and stings of snakes and flies, experiences of hunger and thirst, rashes on my skin, heat and cold, wind and rain, sickness and prison? I'll not fret about such things. To do so only aggravates my trouble. And so this idea that, I actually had poison oak recently. I don't know if anyone's ever had poison oak. It's extremely unpleasant. It's such a great teaching of the Dharma, because you scratch that itch and you spread the itch. And that's with our own mind, right? We're like, ooh, that person makes me angry. And then we think about it and it becomes bigger, right? So this idea of, can we put up with just the simple, it's just an itch, I'm not going to scratch it. Yeah, of course, sometimes we get, mosquito bites or poison oak, no problem. Sometimes we're hungry and thirsty. Can we just leave it as hunger and thirst? Sometimes the weather is bad. Can we not get angry at the weather? And in fact, one of the things he brings up here is there's this beautiful set of descriptions that Pema Chödrön offers. She said, if we're walking down the street or a trail and a random branch falls from a tree and hits us, we're usually not angry at the tree, right? There's wind, the tree branch falls, okay. But if we turn around and someone has thrown a branch at us, we might be kind of angry. We're like, what? What are you doing? And this idea of if we could actually see, and this goes a little to that second form of patience, all the causes and conditions that lead to the branch falling, we could apply that same to leading to why someone is throwing that branch at us. So many causes and conditions in their own conditioning, experiencing what they're projecting onto you. And can we have that same level of patience that we would for the natural? And I think about this with my cats who shred my couch. Someone came over and they were like absolutely not. Even a close friend, right? And yet I'm like, oh, I love you. Stop, right? And then they don't stop. And I'm like, I still love you, So how are we able to kind of project this sense that we know what this person is doing or coming from, we know their experience, so that we can be angry with them? And having that patience to kind of, sometimes with complexity, we have the opportunity to actually learn the source. Oh wow, that person, mistook me for someone else, and they have this ongoing tree branch throwing game. But usually we don't know. Someone does harm, someone hurts us, we don't know why. We'll never find out. And we just have to kind of recognize complexity. There's complexity there. Is next one here. There are some whose bravery increases at the sight of their own blood. while some lose all their strength and faint when it's another blood they see. This results from how the mind is set, in steadfastness or cowardice. And so I'll scorn all injury, and hardships I will disregard. This idea that, for some people, when they see, their own blood, they're like, makes them feel stronger, and they're like, no problem, it's just a cut. But for other people, they see the sight of another person's blood and they'll faint. And he's saying that this has to do with our mindset, right? That we can shift how we experience the day-to-day vicissitudes. And so with this orientation, this idea that we can have this kind of choice, that's where the patience arises. And, she says, Pema says here, the point here is not to mistake our relative reactions for absolute truth. If the sight of blood upsets us, we can't really blame the blood. It isn't what happens to us that makes us unhappy or happy. It's how the mind is set. What makes us suffer is the way we think about what's happening. And this is another crucial message. Not that our storylines create the trouble, but our storylines aggravate the troubles that we experience. And then he says, Shanti Deva says, when sorrows fall upon the wise, their minds remain serene and undisturbed. For in their war against defiled emotions, many are the hardships, as in every battle. So this idea of, for those who are wise, who can see clearly, and honestly kind of see through the delusion that we often impose upon our experience, they have untroubled minds. There's that peace. Thinking scorn of every pain and vanquishing such foes as hatred, these are the exploits of a conquering hero. The rest is slaying what is dead already. And so this idea of trying to really, become an inner hero of not succumbing to your difficult and defiled emotions. Though, he says, suffering has its own worth. Through sorrow, pride is driven out, and pity felt for those who wander in samsara. Evil is avoided, and goodness seems delightful. So in addition to, not succumbing and kind of, in some ways, indulging our sense of frustration or anger at another, and bearing the suffering that we're experiencing, maybe that's, a feeling of being harmed and not doing anything in return, but that this suffering has its own worth. That when we actually can allow ourselves to be with this suffering, whether it's anger or sorrow, it really makes us humble, right? Like when we recognize and can feel that deep level of how much difficulty is experienced when we feel great sorrow, when we feel great frustration. It's like there's no room for pride in that matrix, which I really like. Like often the way we react to our suffering almost prevents us from the humility of recognizing and being with that difficult emotion. And this has been actually demonstrated quite well in the research that when we have our own suffering or difficulty, we are likely, very often, more empathetic towards others. It's like that sorrow helps us, that difficulty helps us open to the difficulty of others. And then when we really also kind of sit with the suffering instead of react or respond, we can start to see and understand the true causes and then avoid them in the future. So one thing he's maybe inadvertently pointing to here is often our anger arises from sorrow, from sadness, right? We have a sense of being wronged in some way or another, being hurt, and we want to react, to retaliate. And if we stay with that sorrow, the patience of staying with it and not letting it kind of flame into anger, that really has these unbelievable benefits. It helps us with pride. It helps us with a sense of greater compassion for others who also experience the suffering. And then it also kind of helps us understand what are the true causes of suffering instead of blaming directly the other. The next stanza, he says, I'm not angry with my bile and other humors, fertile source of pain and suffering. So why should I resent my fellow creatures, victims too of like conditions. So this, again, this idea we aren't angry at the tree branch that falls. We're not angry at, well, some of us are, like the aching of our bones, the fact that we have a body means that we have suffering. Are we just angry at our body all the time? And giving ourselves that more clear seeing. As Pema puts it here, until we start working with our mind, we're ruled by our emotions. They take us over until we're no longer in control. When we get angry with others, we could remember that just like us, they do it for these complex reasons, not the least of which is being controlled by difficult emotions. So there's this kind of like predictability that when we get overcome by difficult emotions, it's very likely that we will respond in ways that are harmful to others. So when we are in the receiving end of it, how can we use that mirror more effectively? And I think, the complexity piece it's so hard and so important to see well. Because the more we know someone, the more we think we actually understand their complexity. And we might have some idea, especially if we gave birth to them, right? Why would they act that way? Don't they? And we just really have to have so much humility when we start to take in the patience of complexity. So the patience of complexity, it really asks of us to have this understanding of the unending shifts and changes, not only that have happened in the past, but also if we're angry at this person, we might be shutting down an idea of how they could change in the future. So very infused with equanimity, the idea of holding the complexity is also holding open the possibility that this person will change, that these behaviors just come and go. So he says here, every injury, whatever the whole variety of evil deeds, is brought about by circumstances. None is independent, none is autonomous. So all of these things are happening on this continuum of what came before. And he writes, conditions once assembled have no thought that now they will give rise to some result. And that which is engendered does not think that it has been produced by such conditions. It's like a little bit of awkward writing here, but I'm going to say it one more time. Conditions once assembled have no thought that now they'll give rise to some result. So this idea of helping us remove the blame as though there were some master plan that created our frustration. So I remember on retreat, one of the second weeks, I decided I'd start attending the 5:30 a.m. sit, which I did not the first week. And my first time I attended it, I was so tired and I couldn't believe it was so long. And we'd been up the night before chanting till quite late. And so there was, this whole story in my head of, why are they doing this to us? I don't see any of the teachers here. We're just here as the yogis. We are sleep deprived. They're actually trying to make us unhappy. Are they breaking us down? I went into this whole fantasy, right? Of all creating all of this story and frustration around, why it was the worst idea that there was a 5:30 a.m. sit and wanting someone to blame. And you know what I did for that whole hour? Just blamed. My mind was so caught up in this idea that it wasn't right and it shouldn't be this way. And I was not able to actually be in the sit whatsoever. So it's really interesting to see how quickly we can kind of solidify what are just different causes and conditions, right? 5:30 a.m. was a hard time for me to wake up. And then, yes, we have late night chanting. Some people need less sleep and it works. Because I also looked around the room at everyone else and I'm like, these people, they're faking it. Nobody here's meditating. They're sleeping. It was just impossible for me to see outside of my own experience. And that's how anger, it can really kind of solidify a narrative and a storyline and lose track completely of just, it's not as though there was some master plan to make me unhappy that morning. That's just the way it's organized. And I also was having a hard time recognizing that I was trapped in an emotion. I thought that this was just the natural response to what was happening, completely rational. So it's so easy for us to kind of fall into this self-centered way of viewing the world. This patience is actually unnatural. It's hard to have this kind of patience with the world. So then we could imagine looking at the news, right? Does anyone still do that? Not recommended. Yeah, a lot of, I mean, I really respect what everyone decides to do, look or not look. I think we all have to do what works for us, but it's so easy to look and solidify and concretize and create that cascading sense of rightness that leads to that moral outrage. And again, not a problem to have that as an immediate reaction. But if we kind of fuel that, if we refuse to see the causes and conditions, refuse to recognize with equanimity the ever-changing nature of that reality, we are just captive to our anger. We're hijacked by that anger. And we have no capacity for freedom, no capacity to be available for others. Yeah, he gets into even a different level here, talking about never thinking, now I will be angry. People are impulsively caught up in anger. Irritation likewise comes through plans never to be experienced. So this idea that we're not necessarily imagining we will become angry, and then we're also not aware when we become angry, and that prevents us from kind of recognizing all the contingent factors that lead to our own sense of anger. So just as there's all these causes and conditions that lead to whatever makes us angry, so all these causes and conditions that trigger us specifically. So he says here, that which is referred to as the primal substance, that which has been labeled as the self, do not come into being thinking, this is how I will arise. So there's no kind of fixed idea of who we are and how we will be. If the self is permanent, it is certain, the self, if permanent, would certainly be impassable, like space itself. And should it meet with other factors, how should they affect it, since it is unchanging? If when things occur, it stays unchanged, and as before, what influence has action had on it? They say that this affects the self, but what connection could there be between them? So this idea that, and he's kind of combating in some ways the views of the time, this Atman view, that the self with a capital S, there's like an absolute self with a soul. And the Buddha, what he was positing and what Shanti Deva was pointing to is this ever-changing nature, this not permanent self. And if it is unchanging, then if it is changing all the time, then our views can change all the time. Even if we feel so righteous in our anger, that itself can be the source of change. So he says that giving up any belief in a fixed or permanent way, if it hasn't yet manifested, it could never come to be. Wow, this is a little confusing here. If it already existed and was so drawn into a certain direction, it could never cease from doing so. In other words, if things were fixed in the way we think they are, then nothing could ever change. And so it's almost like he's pre-imagining the possibility of neuroplasticity, right? This idea that our beliefs are changing. And in the moment of our anger, in the heat of our anger, it feels so fixed and so true for all time. And then we learn like another piece of the story and it changes. So again, this kind of close watching, this close observation of the nature of things really helps us kind of unpack the complexity and develop our patience over time. One of the other pieces here, this last aspect of, the quality of patience, is this patience of developing that distress tolerance. And he said, thus, when enemies or friends are seen to act improperly, be calm and call to mind that everything arises from conditions. So this is the kind of kindness of, even when people close to us are acting in ways that we feel are improper, can we call to mind this understanding of conditions always changing? It's really hard to do on the political stage. And I even kind of imagine, reading the news and actually considering the complexity of causes and conditions that have led to this moment, and without getting fixated in it, because there's so much analysis right now and so much review of how we've gotten where we are. And complexity doesn't have to be an overly cognitive process of understanding. It's more this stance of, I'm going to have this ability to hold the bigger view around these pains, because I recognize there's so many causing conditions and it continues to unfold just as it is. Resistance, you may say, is out of place, for what will be opposed by whom? The stream of suffering is cut through by patience. There is nothing inappropriate in wanting that. All things dependent on something else. On this depends the fact that none are independent. Knowing this will not be annoyed at objects that resemble anything in appearance. So this idea of, recognizing in some ways the illusory nature of all things. So embracing the dreamlike nature of how we move through the world. It's not that we're seeing things as true. Maybe in our opening meditation, when we're trying to just hear what is heard or sense what is experienced, we're closer to a realistic view of what's happening. But largely, we experience the world through our projections over and over and over. And he's saying that if you can really recognize this kind of illusory nature of how we see the entire world, we can be in a better relationship with reality as it is. So I like that idea that recognizing the dream helps us actually see reality more truly. And I think, one way I've understood these teachings on patience is that, patience, like I mentioned in the very beginning, it has this dignity to it, and it also has this different time scale to it. Not only are we kind of zoomed out in terms of having a larger perspective of the cause and conditions, we also can zoom out on the time scale. And I do love, even in this city, there's many trees that predate all of us here and are definitely going to be here a lot longer than us. So when we get into the kind of tree-like consciousness, right, or sky-like consciousness, or mountain-like consciousness, it's another way for us to engage in that kind of larger, more quantum view of everything that's occurring right now. And not in a way to bypass the true suffering and harm that's going on in this moment, but in a way to kind of have one way to practice continuing to show up with a heart that is open and caring. But it's, the patience teachings, like, it's so hard with anger. It's so hard to have patience with anger. It's so counter to what we would naturally think is the appropriate response. And yet trying, especially with the smaller things and then growing to the larger things, it can really give us this opportunity to embrace, that we need to keep training in patience with our anger, because there is going to continue to be all these challenges and adversity, that we can continue to work with patience by understanding complexity, and that we can start to, feel like the heat of our anger without succumbing to it fully, build that distress tolerance. I do think some of distress tolerance is just what we do meditating. Meditating's hard. It's unpleasant. And often as we get even deeper in our practice, more subtle levels arise of difficulty, right? Not like, oh, just keep going, it'll get easier. Like, it just keeps getting harder. But it also helps us with that core ability, like, this might be hard, but I'm staying here. And the reason we stay, it's much bigger than, oh, I want the outcome after I sit. Yeah, that might happen. We stay because of the bigger intention and commitment to bodhicitta, right? To that thing that is bigger than us. And, one thing I mentioned in my last time here when I was sharing a bit more on retreat is once you sit and you sit and you sit and you continue sitting and all these emotions arise and all these difficulties arise and the mind is wild, bodhicitta really does start to kind of rise to the surface. And our practice of tenderizing the heart, of feeling the heartbreak, that's a direct way in and helps us with that commitment. Because to continue to shift and change our behavior away from what's difficult and towards what is, that equanimity, that patience, and that loving presence, we have to keep our motivation going with clear intention. Coming back to our intention, it's like the ground from which the patience can arise. So in doing so, we can dedicate the merit of our practice, bringing forth that bodhicitta. And so taking a moment and settling into the body and the breath. And considering the possibility that our time here together of reflection and connection, that it has its own energy, its own potential. And feeling the energy of that potential, this possibility that we could extend this energy outward, radiate these hearts outward. We bring hands together at the heart. And consider dedicating this practice that all beings could feel safe and protected from inner and outer harms. All beings could experience the true causes that allow them to have a happy and calm mind. That all beings could be healthy and strong. That all beings could experience support and ease in their lives. Thank you for your practice. We will do a bit more on patience next week and actually looking. So I invite you, if you are going to come next week, to really try out some patience. And we'll have a bit more of a discussion on what it actually feels like qualitatively when we don't succumb to anger and when we practice patience. Two quick announcements before Mace comes up here. I mentioned last time that I will be hosting one of my teachers who does work in bringing kind of sacred plant essence and consciousness into everyday life. She's doing a tobacco workshop that I'll be helping her with, and I left some flyers at the front. That'll be in the end of April. I'm also teaching at the Alembic in the end of April, a half day on anger exclusively by popular demand. Literally, I think 3 people asked me to do that last month. And then, there's a couple other retreats. I'm doing a week-long in Costa Rica, actually, for the first time. I didn't bring any flyers on that this time, but if you're interested, I can send you some info. And otherwise, that's it.